Story 1. The Man Who Owned the Forest. I've been hiking alone for almost 8 years now, long enough that the idea of following a blazed trail feels like cheating. I want the places where the map turns white and the cell signal dies the second you leave the parking lot. That hunger for real solitude is what put me in the Bitterroot National Forest last October, way up in the most remote northern corner, where even the rangers rarely go. I'd left Colorado before dawn, drove 11 hours with nothing but coffee and anticipation, and hit the trailhead just as the sky turned the color of wet ash. The air was sharp, mid-40s, carrying that heavy, sweet smell of pine needles soaked after weeks of rain. Everything felt perfect. 4, maybe 4.5 hours in, my legs burning pleasantly, the forest opened up and dropped away into a ravine that looked like the earth had been clawed open by something enormous. 40, maybe 50 feet straight down to broken shale and a thin silver ribbon of water. The walls were glassy with moisture and loose rock. One wrong step and you'd slide all the way to the bottom with nothing to grab. Spanning the gap was a single ancient Douglas fir, easily 4 feet thick, bark worn to a pale, slippery shine by decades of weather and by desperate hikers. Before me, I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the water hiss far below, feeling the cold damp rising up the rock face. My pulse was already climbing just looking at it. I tested the log with one boot, then both, then started across, arms spread like a tightrope walker, every muscle locked. Halfway over, I made the mistake of glancing down. The drop yawned beneath me, black water flashing between rocks, sharp as broken teeth. I forced my eyes forward and kept moving, one careful foot at a time, until solid ground finally met my boot, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The rush was incredible, that electric high you only get when you've just stared death in the face and walked away. I stood there grinning like an idiot, hands on my knees, tasting iron in the air. And then I heard it thunk, 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 rhythmic, deliberate, coming from the exact spot I just left. I turned slowly, already knowing I wasn't going to like what I saw. A man stood on the far bank, 15 feet back from the log, mid-50s, maybe older. Canvas coat the color of old blood, beard wild and streaked with gray, eyes so deep set they looked like holes punched in damp paper. In his hands, a full-sized felling axe, the blade catching what little light leaked through the clouds. He didn't speak. He just walked straight to the root end of the log and started swinging. Not frantic, not angry, just calm, practiced strokes, the way a man chops wood he's chopped 1,000 times before. Chips flew. The smell of fresh sap hit me across the gap. I found my voice. "Hey, stop! I just crossed that thing." He never looked up. Thunk, thunk. Another blow bit deeper. The entire tree shivered. A low groan traveling its length, I felt it in my feet. He had watched me cross. He had waited until I was safe on the other side. And then he started destroying the only way back. I screamed every curse I knew, voice cracking, bouncing off the ravine walls and dying in the moss. He paused once, set the axe down almost gently, and stepped to the edge. Up close, his skin looked wrong, grayish, like it had been soaked too long. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost kind. "I know these mountains better than you ever will, city boy." He didn't threaten me. He didn't need to. The certainty in those words was worse than any threat. He held my gaze until something inside me went cold and still. Then he picked up the axe, turned, and walked back into the trees without hurry, swallowed by the shadows like he belonged to them. I stood there a long time, wind moaning up the ravine, until I realized the log was still shifting, splintering, ready to drop any second phone. No service, not even emergency SOS. The sun was already behind the ridge, bleeding orange into the clouds. I started downstream, boots slipping on wet stone. Telling myself the ravine had to narrow eventually, it didn't. It only grew deeper, darker, the walls closing in until the sky was nothing but a jagged gray ribbon overhead. Every step echoed strangely, like the rock was hollow. Hours later, lungs raw, legs trembling, I stumbled into a small clearing, fresh ashes in a stone ring. For one heartbeat, I felt salvation. Then I saw the carvings, deep, deliberate symbols cut into every trunk, spirals and angles that hurt to follow. From the lower branches hung rusted tools, knotted cords, small animal skulls arranged in perfect circles. The air tasted metallic, like blood and wet pennies. I backed away, and the forest answered with footsteps. Not one set, 3. Soft, patient, perfectly spaced. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they moved. I ran. I ran until my vision tunneled, until I found another fallen tree. This one half rotted and slick. I crossed anyway, slipped, almost fell, clawed my way to the far side with bleeding fingers. When I looked back, there were 3 men standing where the axeman had been. Same dead eyes, same filth. One carried a length of pipe that caught the last light like a blade. The first one rested a hand on the log, testing it the way I had hours earlier. Then he shook his head almost sadly, and one of the others spoke, voice carrying clear across the water. "Go on, you got lucky this time." I ran until the forest spat me out at the trailhead, sometime after midnight. I still hike, but every fallen tree I see now looks like a trap, and every distant thud of wood on wood stops my heart. Story 2. The smoke that refused to rise. 3 years ago, I pushed deeper into the boundary waters than I ever had before, far north of any portage, where the lakes have no names and the map is just blank green. I love that country when it's angry. Black spruce jabbing at the sky, wind hissing through reeds, water so dark it looks like oil. 4 hours in, I realized I was properly turned around. The sun was still high but hidden behind thick clouds, so direction was a guess. That sick, childish panic started curling in my stomach. Then I noticed the rustling behind me, always the same distance, always stopping when I did. I told myself it was a moose. I knew I was lying. The sound exploded into a circle. Wolves stepped out between the trees like they'd been waiting for the Q7, maybe 8. Some showed teeth, some just stared with those flat yellow eyes that said the debate was already over. I pulled my knife and remember thinking, very clearly, so this is how it ends eaten alive because I was too proud to carry a GPS. Then every single wolf froze at once. Ears snapped forward. Bodies went rigid. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking past me at something I couldn't see. A heartbeat later, they bolted, full panicked flight, crashing through brush like they were running from fire. The forest died. No birds, no insects, no wind. Even the light felt thinner, like someone had turned down the brightness on the world. Whatever scared an entire pack from 50 yards away was still there behind me. I should have followed the wolves. Instead, I walked toward whatever they'd fled from, because going back meant admitting I was lost and night was coming. 20 minutes later, I stepped into a clearing no bigger than a living room. Someone had stacked stones into perfect little towers. Symbols were carved into the white bark of birch trees. Sharp, deliberate lines that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. From the branches hung thin leather cords, knotted with finger bones, rusted nails, tiny bundles of hair. The ground around the fire pit was black, not with ash, but with something oily that reflected light wrong. And above it all, 6 feet off the ground, hung a thick layer of black smoke, not rising, not drifting, just suspended, perfectly still, like it had been painted onto the air. It had edges you could see, sharp as glass. I couldn't move, My eyes kept sliding back to that smoke no matter how hard I tried to look away. A weight settled on my chest, grief, raw and heavy, for something that hadn't happened yet. Tears started running down my face, and I didn't know why. The clearing felt less like a place and more like a photograph of a place, like I was on the wrong side of a window. I don't know how long I stood there, 5 minutes, maybe more. The smoke never moved. Finally, something inside me snapped awake, and I ran. I ran until my legs gave out, until memory starts breaking into pieces. Next thing I clearly remember is stumbling out of the trees after full dark, soaked in sweat, teeth chattering though I wasn't cold. I never told anyone where that clearing was. I'm not even sure I could find it again. Some places don't want to be found twice. Story 3. The night we shot the mountain man. We were 18, freshly licensed, and thought we were invincible. Me, my girlfriend Jess, Ryan, and his girl Tara loaded my dad's old Suburban and drove 9 hours from central Illinois to the Ouachita Mountains in eastern Oklahoma for a February backpacking trip. We wanted waterfalls frozen in mid-spill, wanted to feel like the only 4 people on Earth. We rolled in after dark, set up at a designated campground just to sleep. Planning to disappear into the backcountry the next day, I had my dad's Taurus 9mm tucked in my pack. Bear insurance, he called it. Morning was crisp, low 30s, our breath hanging in clouds. We hit the trail toward a waterfall everyone online raved about. Halfway there, Tara started whispering that someone was watching us from the ridgeline. Tall figure, perfectly still. When we all turned, he was gone. Ryan yelled some macho nonsense into the trees. We laughed it off, but the laughter felt thin. By afternoon, we were hunting for a wild campsite when Jess grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. A woman stood on the opposite slope. Had to be 6'6", skeletal, just staring. The wind lifted her hair like black fire. We screamed that we were armed, and she melted backward into the pines without a sound. We found a perfect spot. Creek bending around a deep pool, boulders for seats, shelf of flat ground for tents. We swam even though the water was barely above freezing, cooked ribeyes over the fire, passed a bottle of Jack, rolled joint after joint. By midnight, we were loud, stupid, happy. Jess and I were tangled up in our sleeping bags, laughing into each other's necks, when the laugh came from right outside the tent. Low, wet, too close. I thought Ryan was messing with us. Real funny, asshole. From the other tent, Ryan's voice small and scared. That wasn't me. The air changed, became thick, hard to breathe. I grabbed the pistol, unzipped the door, stepped out into moonlight sharp as broken glass. Fired 3 shots straight up. The explosions rolled down the valley like thunder. Something big crashed away through the brush. We dragged the tents together, sat back to back the rest of the night, jumping at every snap of a twig. Next morning, we almost bailed. Instead, we convinced ourselves one more night would prove we weren't cowards. We hiked closer to the trailhead, found another site, cooked steak again, got drunk again, passed out again. I woke at 3 a.m., needing to piss so bad it hurt. Took the gun, stepped out barefoot onto cold dirt. The forest was dead quiet, moon full and white. I was midstream when the leaves crunched, deliberate, 30 yards out. I swung the headlamp. The beam landed on the tall man from the first day, long black hair hanging in ropes, eyes catching the light like an animal's, machete hanging loose in his hand. He smiled. He charged. I don't remember deciding to shoot. I just remember the gun bucking in my hand, again and again, brass spinning into the firelight. He made a sound, half snarl, half scream, and went down hard. We didn't check if he was dead. We grabbed packs, left the tents flapping like ghosts, and ran 3 miles through the dark, branches whipping our faces raw. Reached the Suburban, locked ourselves inside, covered the windows with sleeping bags, and waited for dawn with the gun on the dash. We drove out without looking back. Never called the Rangers. Never saw a single news story. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear that wet laugh right outside the nylon. And I wonder how many more of them are out there, waiting for the next group of kids who think the woods are empty.